recently, several sanctuary city mayors had to testify in front of Congress. And one of those mayors is from Massachusetts. So the mayor of Boston, Mayor Wu, who used to be my former mayor, she is now testifying in front of Congress, along with Eric Adams and along with Brandon Johnson, who's from Chicago, Eric Adams from New York City. I want to start with this. I think this is part of an opening statement from Eric Adams. And then there's other parts during this testimony that we got to get into because it was crazy, okay? It was all crazy. Out of all of them, I will say this. I do think that Mayor Wu probably performed the best. I think she really held her own. Doesn't mean that you have to agree with her, but I think she did a great job at actually answering the questions. And you'll see what I mean when we get to some of the other clips here. So let's go ahead and bring this in here. Come out here. And here we go.
As a result, New York City was hit with the largest humanitarian crisis in our city's history over the last 3 years. Federal law did not allow me to stop buses from entering New York City. State law required me to provide all in our city with housing and meals and to educate children. City law makes it unlawful to collaborate with ICE for civil enforcement. We complied with all of these legal requirements and still managed the humanitarian crisis with the care and compassion, while at the same time bringing down crime, recovering our economy, and preventing any child from being forced to sleep on the streets. Comprehensive immigration reform is long overdue. While the solution is not within my control as a mayor, I am committed to working with federal officials to go after violent gangs and those who harm residents of our city. This is why we have over 330 NYPD officers assigned to different federal joint task forces, over 70 of which are assigned to task forces with Homeland Security investigation, the criminal investigation arm of ICE. Those task forces focus on many different important priorities, including going after violent gangs and child exploitation. I look forward to sharing New York City collaborations that we do daily with our city, state, and federal partners to keep New York City to continue to be the safest big city in America. Thank you.
So, hold up, bro. So for those who are not aware, Eric Adams was one of the mayors that was pretty vocal that he wasn't getting the assistance from the Biden administration that he wanted or he needed to handle the migrant population in New York City at the time. And I would say he was so vocal about it that the Democratic Party kind of turned on him, right? There's an ongoing investigation that's happening with Eric Adams. I'm sure you guys all know about that as well, about corruption, surprise, surprise. But he was one of the mayors that was very vocal and said publicly, Joe Biden, we need help. We need resources. We need this. We need that. And apparently he was not given those resources. So he was very vocal about it. And that was after he had already, decided we're going to give debit cards, et cetera. And then eventually, I think the resources were just overwhelmed, right? I mean, New York City is very dense. Like Boston, very dense. So there's not a lot of space to work with. People are kind of living on top of each other and you only have so much to work with. So some would say that Eric Adams is basically there's a witch hunt against him because he spoke out against the Biden administration during this, right? So that was Eric Adams, hoorah there. Being kind of vocal about it. And then I want to bring into this part right about here. I believe this is when Mayor Wu comes in. Listen to this.
I'm not familiar with that law because I'm focused on the city of Boston, but we follow all state, city, and federal laws in Boston.
What happens when you get in conflict with them? Who do you support?
The Constitution, as I understand it, doesn't require cities or police officers or anyone to follow their laws in conflict, follow federal laws in conflict with local laws or state laws.
Okay, in the Constitution, it says, and it's explicit, that the federal government has jurisdiction and supremacy over all immigration laws, right? I mean, I've heard it a number of times from my colleagues over here. We're the ones who can define that. We're the ones that have it. We just heard we want a comprehensive immigration policy. How can you get a comprehensive immigration policy when you're defining it from the very get-go? You're building it on false premises and false tenets.
Respectfully, Congressman, you could pass bipartisan legislation, and that would be comprehensive immigration law.
Well,
The false narrative is that immigrants in general are criminals, or immigrants in general cause all sorts of danger and harm. That is actually what is undermining safety in our communities. If you
Let me pause here for a second. So you guys got to understand, Michelle Wu, and by the way, I've spoken to her in person. I've confronted her in person about housing issues in Boston, and she's a little lady. Like she's very small. Like she's like short. Like, and I'm 5'5", so like she's a short little lady. But she did, listen to what I had to say, and I didn't get the answer that I wanted, but she'll listen, she'll hear what you have to say. And she has admitted that she failed when it comes to the housing issue in Boston, because that was her number one thing that she ran on, that she failed, right? So she's running for re-election again. I'll get into that story another time, because Robert Kraft's son is running against her. So we'll talk about that another time. But you got to understand, Michelle Wu went to Harvard. All right. You're not going to trip her up with these questions. So that's why I said, when you go back, if you watch this whole thing, I feel like she did the best. She performed the best when it comes to just answering the questions. So you may not believe, or you may not support what she's saying, but she knows how to answer the questions. And then there was this part right about here. Let me bring it just a little bit more. Listen to what she said here.
You're building it on false premises and false tenets.
Respectfully, Congressman, you could pass bipartisan legislation, and that would be comprehensive immigration law.
Well,
The false narrative is that immigrants in general are criminals, or immigrants in general cause all sorts of danger and harm. That is actually what is undermining safety in our communities. If you wanted to make us safe, pass gun reforms. Stop cutting Medicaid. Stop cutting cancer research. Stop cutting funds for veterans. That is what will make our city safe.
Yes, thank you. I yield back.
Chair.
Yeah, so that was a good way to answer that question, because notice what he said at the end of the statement. He goes, "Thank you, I yield back." Yeah, he ain't got nothing to say to that. If you say stop cutting Medicaid, stop doing this, he don't have anything to say to that. I was like, oh, I yield back. And she just had a baby, and she had her baby there, right? I believe, if I remember correctly, she did ask them if there could be a delay, because she had just given birth, but she's there with the baby and all that kind of stuff. Now, to that point, what Mayor Wu did not address, and honestly, Ayanna Pressley was a part of this committee, and she should have brought this up, but I know she wasn't going to, because she's trying to play her political game too. Ayanna Pressley, of all the people, who is a Boston resident, of all the people who is in Congress and very familiar with Roxbury, with Dorchester, of all the people, you know that it was Mayor Wu and Governor Healey's decision to kick the Black kids out of the rec center in Roxbury so that they could house migrants in the rec center. And I point this out because of this. First, you took them to Martha's Vineyard, and all the rich people who claim to be so liberal and so caring basically said they can't stay here. It was like that scene in Forrest Gump when the guy goes, "You can't sit here." It was like that. You can't sit here, not in our backyard. And Martha's Vineyard is vacant most of the year. Keep that in mind. So they took them from Martha's Vineyard and they said, okay, let's go and put them in other communities. And guess what communities they put them in? Low income Black communities. Roxbury is one of the lowest income neighborhoods in Boston. They don't have the resources. You took a rec center from a Black community, you kicked them out, and you brought another group of people in. The Black kids who had something to do after school by going to the rec center and they played rec sports, now all of a sudden had nothing to do. I always grew up with the belief that kids need something to do other than school. And this is the way that I was raised as well. You ain't got to agree with me, but it is what it is. The reality is, when you take these things away from the children and they live in impoverished communities, you are taking away something that they enjoy doing, and now they got free time on their hands. And this is when trouble can come in. This is when gangs can come in and try to take those kids and get them out in the streets. This was something those kids had to do while their parents were working 2 jobs. So yes, that is a problem. And there are other places where they could have gone, but you brought them into a low-income Black community, taking resources from the Black people who are there and giving it to them. That is a problem. And there are plenty of people in Boston that have a problem with Mayor Wu and Mar Heerly about that. You didn't ask. They just took. So I will say that she does a good job of answering questions. But what she did without getting the permission of the people in the community, without even asking them, what they did was wrong. You don't take those kind of things from those kids. You don't take those types of things from those communities. That is wrong, period. Now we are moving on, because now we're going to the next part. Like I said, this hearing was over 6 hours long. I believe this is the part where Byron comes in to ask these mayors how much they have spent on migrant communities in the past couple of years. Now, again, don't forget Brandon Johnson, mayor of Chicago, who has received a lot of animosity from people within his community about what he has done and how he's walked over the people in the community and bent over backwards for the migrant community that came in. A lot of people are mad at him. I want you to hear how they answer these questions. This is very important to see.
9 million. Mayor Johnson, Chicago. How much has the city of Chicago spent on illegal immigration?
If you're referring to the 2022 up to 2024 of the buses coming from Texas, roughly the same percentage of the state of Texas, about 1% of our overall budget.
What is that? Because I don't have the city's budget in front of me. Numbers.
It's 1%, and if you want the actual calculation, we can make sure someone.
You're the mayor. You don't have the math in front of you.
It's 1% of the overall budget over the last 4 years.
That's why you're a failing
which
mayor.
is
Mayor
the same
Adams,
number that
how
was
much did the
sent from
city of
us.
New York?
Thank you. I was going to bring it up. MBD, Brandon Johnson, 6.7% approval rating. Ladies and gentlemen, how could you show up there unprepared? Brandon Johnson, how could you show up there unprepared? How do you not know the answer to that question? I mean, Brandon Johnson just woke up one day and was just like, yeah, I want to be mayor. Like, I don't get it. I don't understand. And I've spoken to people in Chicago. They are not happy with Brandon Johnson. Not happy. But this, you show up to Congress, you're not there because they're proud of what you're doing. You're there because they're questioning what you did. And whether you guys agree with sanctuary cities or not, the reality is Brandon Johnson should have shown up prepared. What do you mean you don't have the numbers? You don't know how much you spent? Oh, it's about roughly 1% of. We don't know what that means. We don't know. that's why, like, so Byron can sit up there and say to you, that's why you're the worst performing failed mayor. That's why he can talk to you like that, because your numbers show that and your actions show that. It's just, Jamal Green ran against him. It looks like to me the people should have voted for Jamal Green. It just, I don't know. 2% of the, we don't know. We don't know. We don't know. You guys know that city council approves the budget? Guess who signs it?
Actually spent on illegal immigration. Mayor Johnson, I already asked you, you don't have a hard number. And if you don't have a hard number, you're not running your city well. Mayor Adams, how much did the city of New York actually spend on illegal immigration?
6.9 billion of taxpayers' dollars.
$6.9 billion of
taxpayer money.
Taxpayer money on a problem that was fostered on the American people. Mayor Wu, in the city of Boston, how much did you spend?
We don't ask about immigration status and delivering city
You don't
services,
ask
so
about
we
how
don't
much
have
money
that
the city
number.
of Boston has spent on illegal immigration?
We
Are you
don't
out of your
distinguish
mind?
between immigration status.
Do you
as
manage
part
your
of our
budget
city
or not,
policies.
Mayor Wu?
That is how we keep
Mayor
our city
Wu,
safe.
do you manage
We
your
have
budget
the
or not?
numbers to prove it. I manage my budget. I have a AAA bond rating dating back 10 years.
So to the city of Boston,
budget.
just understand that your mayor does not care how much of your resources she has spent on people who are not citizens
The city
of
of Boston
the city of
is
Boston.
sick of having
I'm
people
reclaiming my
outside
time.
Boston
Mr.
telling
Bear,
us what
Mr.
we
Bear, I have
need.
a question for you because I understand.
That part right there, what she said, everybody needed to hear that, especially if you live in Boston. You needed to hear that because she's not lying. They don't ask. These meetings are free. If you guys ever want to go to like your mayor meetings or your city council meetings, sometimes the mayor may be present at those meetings, you should go. They're free. Just look, all you have to do is look it up online. City of Boston, city of whatever, wherever you live, look it up online. They show you when they have these meetings and stuff like that. She's not lying. But you guys need to know that. Meanwhile, you guys don't have money to pay for schools. You don't have money to fix these schools in Roxbury and Dorchester. You ain't got money to do that. You want to put the students through a lottery system and you want to tell the students, good luck. Hope you win the educational lottery so you can go to a better school in Newton. But she just told you. A lot of people don't know this. David, let's go. David said we should raid these events, Sabby. David, let's go. I went to one and it was a hot mess. I went to one city council. It was tough. It was brutal. They don't know. You see this? She don't ask.
I understand Cato's perspective when it comes to illegal immigration. I understand that the Cato Institute for a long time has had a standard of actually having open immigration into the United States. Generally speaking, I don't want to get into specifics.
We support legal immigration. We want immigration to be legal.
Let me ask you this question, because one of the great libertarians of the modern era, Milton Friedman, famously said, you can either have open borders or a welfare state, but you have to choose. Mr. Beer, what do you choose?
Milton Friedman said he wanted to allow illegal immigration to continue. I disagree with Milton Friedman's position on that. We should have legal immigration and build a wall around the welfare state, not around the country. That's in the best interest of taxpayers.
And I would argue that under the current system where you have sanctuary cities popping up, it is not possible to build that wall. So America has to choose, Mr. Beer, you're done. America has to choose between securing our nation or protecting the taxpayer. I choose secure the nation. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair.
That was brutal. That was brutal. And it's just, again, like they were not prepared. And one of the things I said before is that I don't think that at the time, I can't speak for the other cities. I can only speak for Boston and Cambridge and Somerville. At the time when they decided to create the sanctuary cities, at the time, the numbers wasn't an issue, right? So it was very different back then. But then when Governor Abbott and Governor DeSantis, when they started sending buses and planes from their states to Massachusetts, that changed things. And I don't think the mayors, when they made the decision to say, okay, we're going to be sanctuary city, because it's not just Boston, Somerville was also a sanctuary city. When they made that decision, like I said, at the time, the numbers were not an issue. And they didn't really, at the time, stop and think, okay, are we going to have enough housing for everybody and that type of thing? Because it just wasn't an issue. But then it became a bigger issue. And then they finally said, we don't have the housing. We don't have this. We don't have that. Right? We have to go to this part here too.
Do you agree that someone who demonstrates a willingness to harm society should be detained by immigration officials? Mayor Adams. Yes or no?
Within the confines and restrictions of the law, yes, I do.
Okay. Mayor
Someone
John.
that's committed a crime, yes. Someone that's committed a crime, yes, should be detained, and we would help them.
Every violent criminal should be held accountable, and that's why crime is down in the city of Chicago, because we're doing just that.
Mayor Wu.
If you commit crimes against the people of Boston, you'll be prosecuted.
Another yes or no question. Has anything that's happened in this country in the last 3 years given you reason to consider removing sanctuary city status from your communities? Mayor Adams.
I'm clear that what we do is prevent some of these crimes from taking place.
Mayor Johnson.
We think the system that we have works, and we will keep it.
Violent crime is down in Chicago because of welcoming city ordinance.
Have you considered removing sanctuary city status?
Well, violent crime is down in the city of Chicago under my leadership, and we're going to continue to do what we have to do to make sure that that continues.
Mayor Wu.
We are
So Brandon Johnson again didn't answer the question. Oh my God.
the safest major city in the country, in part because people trust that they can call 911 and help police solve crimes.
Have you considered removing sanctuary city status?
We are going to continue to keep our policies in place that have been working for the people of Boston.
I think you've answered the question. The American people are fed up with the policies that protect criminals, waste taxpayer dollars, and prioritize illegal immigrants over the safety and well-being of.
You guys get the gist there. One thing I will add that Mayor Wu did say, she said Boston's like one of the safest, like she's correct about that. I was actually surprised, like when I moved here, oh my God, how many years? In 2011, when I moved here in 2011, I remember reading that and I was like, really? And I remember looking at the crime rate here in Boston, and I was actually surprised how low the crime rate is here, considering, you know, it is an urban area. But the reality is, when you compare it to other cities that have similar, I guess, infrastructure, like if you compare it to like New York City, or you compare it to like Chicago, and you compare it to, the reality is Boston is a lot safer. And I mean, I don't know. I think it's one of those things that you don't realize until you come here. Because honestly, you can walk around in any neighborhood. Like I've had no problem ever. You can walk around any neighborhood, and for the most part, like a lot of the crime I think that happens in Boston is not stranger crime, right? It's I know you crime. And that was different for me too. Whereas in other cities I've lived in, there's a lot of stranger crime. Like just seriously, just a lot of that. But she is correct about that. The funniest part of this testimony here was when AOC comes in to question Eric Adams. For whatever reason, I don't know if she forgot what committee hearing she was sitting in on, but the topic that she's discussing has nothing to do with this hearing. It was just really weird. Like, watch for yourself. Watch this. This is interesting.
On January 31st of 2025, your attorneys met with federal prosecutors regarding the charges of bribery, campaign finance fraud, and conspiracy against you. Were you aware of this meeting prior to its occurrence?
Congresswoman,
Microphone, please.
I'm sorry. As I stated to your colleagues, and I'm going to continue to state because we're asking the same question over and over again.
This isn't a question.
This case is in front of Judge Ho, and out of deference to
I understand, Mayor Adams.
Process, I'm going to
Mayor Adams, as your
to the
counsel,
court.
I'm sure will inform you. The only permissible way to refuse to answer a question during a congressional proceeding such as this is by pleading the Fifth Amendment. Deference to the judge is not a permissible excuse for not answering questions during a congressional hearing. Is it your intention to plead the fifth today?
Councilwoman, you said the only way that you can't answer a question is to plead the fifth. I am answering your question. I'm answering your question directly. That
You are not, Mayor Adams.
okay, I believe I am.
I will ask it again. Were you aware of the meeting between your attorneys and federal prosecutors on January 31st? Answering the
So here's the problem, folks. Eric Adams' investigation has nothing to do with this hearing. You know, it's like, this is a totally different, this hearing is about the sanctuary cities and the mayors of the sanctuary cities. And by the way, Eric Adams was not called to testify. He volunteered to come testify. The others, from what I understand, I know Mayor Wu was called to testify. So just keep that in mind for a second and hold on to that. What is she talking about? So you see, when she ran for that position to be chair of the Oversight Committee, and Nancy Pelosi went behind her back and they said, she told everybody to go with Jerry Connolly, old dude who is sick, from what I understand. And people were like, younger people need to lead. Like, some of you guys need to retire and let the younger people lead. But then you do stuff like this, and it made people kind of look at you kind of weird. Like, what the hell are you talking about? And then if people feel like you don't know what you're talking about, then you're just proving them right that younger people can't lead. To me, this made no sense. I don't know if when she woke up, she thought she was going to a different hearing, but this hearing is not about Eric Adams' investigation. This hearing is about Eric Adams being mayor of New York City during the migrant issue. This has nothing to do with his investigation. But she continues on.
This question is a yes or a no.
And I'm going to answer it again. Out of deference to Judge Ho, with this case,
That is not an answer, Mayor Adams.
he is going to deal with the outcome of the case.
Mayor Adams, is it your intention to not comply with these questions?
As I stated, I'm answering your questions, and what you're doing, let's be clear on, you're asking me about communications between my attorney and I. And I don't think
I'll
that
move
is
on to the next
appropriate
question. If
to
it's
be
about-
asking a question
if it's
between
about-
my attorney and I, because we are in a country of law and order.
I understand.
And your
So, Mayor
relationship
Adams,
and
who
communications
is
with
your
your attorney
attorney?
should be respected.
Who is your attorney?
Alex Spiro.
Alex Spiro, thank you. Now, Mayor Adams, have your attorneys ever met with city officials? That is not covered. You know, I'm not asking about your conversations with your attorneys. Have your attorneys met with city officials, New York City officials?
Any communication or activity between my attorney
yes or
and I
no?
is
Have
up to
your-
our attorney
have
and
your
I. You can
personal
reach out
attorneys
to,
met with New York City officials?
Alex Spiro, my attorney, to deal with those communications.
Mayor Adams, in this meeting, did anyone representing you, including perhaps Mr. Spiro, agree or allude to any arrangement with the Trump administration that would involve changing city policies in exchange to reconsideration of the charges brought against you?
Again, this has nothing to do with the hearing that is taking place. When I tell you it's a mad world, this is what I'm talking about.
You say in this meeting, can you be clear?
In the January
on which-
31st meeting?
Again, there was never any agreement, never any quid pro quo. and
That's
I
not what
did
I'm
nothing
asking.
wrong. Never any agreement, never any quid pro quo.
Was there an allusion
and nothing,
to
and
a
nothing
shift
that
in
I've
New York
done
City
wrong.
policy?
Gentlelady's time's expired. And I just want to remind everybody, Mayor Adams is here voluntarily, and we appreciate that. The topic of the hearing is about our illegal alien problem and the drain on the cities and what the solution is. So, Chair, now.
It's a very, very mad world. This is what I'm talking about. It's a mad world, you guys. A mad world. Like, whoa, that was way off script, because that had nothing to do with the testimony. That had nothing to do with that hearing at all. That hearing is not about Eric Adams' investigation. It's not about him and his attorney. That hearing is specifically about what happened with the immigration issue and those mayors from sanctuary cities. Now, again, I say to this, it's laughable. I'm sorry. I say this, at the end of the day, I think at the time when they made the decision and they said we will be sanctuary cities, keep in mind the numbers weren't an issue at that point in time, but things did change, right? So what I do not agree with, number one, I'm heavily against gentrification, heavily against that. And if you have never gone through gentrification, spare me the noise. I don't even want to hear it. I'm very against gentrification. Number two, I do not agree with kicking Black people out of these communities so that other people can come in. Number three, when we talk about resources, before you even say, okay, we're going to bring 1,000 people into this neighborhood, you have to make sure that you have the resources. And by resources, I don't just mean money. I don't just mean housing. I mean, kids have to go to school, right? The teachers have to have the resources to teach more kids. These things aren't free. And if you've never worked in the education system, you don't understand that. You don't know what it's like if you're a teacher and then all of a sudden you go from a classroom of 20 or 15 to 20 to 30 to 40. Your pay doesn't increase. Those types of things. When we say resources, community resources, those things should have been implemented, and it wasn't. So residents were angry. You can't get mad at the residents. People will hear that and people will say, oh, that's anti-immigrant. First of all, I'm not anti-immigrant. I don't like them saying things like calling people aliens. I don't like people being called aliens. What do you mean? I do think that there are ways that you can handle both of these situations, but you cannot kick people out who are barely making it as it is to pay the rent that continues to increase because of the already ongoing gentrification. And now it's just, there's more added on top of that, and there's a lack of resources. And I'll always stand up for people who have to go through that. And if you've never been poor, and if you've never lived in neighborhoods that have been gentrified, you don't know what that's like. You don't know what it's like where everything goes up. So I say that time and time again. The reality is they're there testifying in Congress to answer to, I guess, how money was spent. And Brandon Johnson from Chicago doesn't know how much money was spent. I don't know what's going on with Brandon Johnson, but your approval rating right now is very, very low, and the people are not happy with you. But at the end of the day, what people have to ask is, why is it able to happen in the first place? And the reason why it is able to happen is because the corporate class, the oligarchy, the billionaire class, they allow it to happen. Companies want cheap labor. Companies don't want to pay you. Believe it or not, they don't want to give you benefits. They won't say it, but I'll say it. Companies, you think they love to give you benefits? You think they love to give you paid time off, paid sick leave, and all this kind of stuff? These things cost the company money. They want cheap labor. So at the end of the day, as I've said before, don't point your finger at the migrant community. Point your finger at the billionaire and the corporate class that is allowing it to happen because they want cheap labor. And so as a result, the workers are pitted against each other. And the billionaires, they just sit back and laugh. Meanwhile, they get tax breaks. Always remember, like I told you, follow the money. See who's really pulling the strings. But it's a mad world, folks. It's a mad world. I think with that testimony there, I think what it revealed is that some of the mayors of these cities don't know what they're doing. I think we can all see that with Brandon Johnson. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.